Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Strength Game Podcast. I'm your host, Nick O'Brien, and this is episode number 128. The Strength Game is a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing all things physical culture with the coaches, athletes, iron enthusiasts, and experts deeply embedded in the strength game on both sides of the profession, both as coaches and as competitive athletes. I want to thank everyone for all your support, everyone who has liked, shared, and commented on the show. All that support allows us to continue to bring on expert guests and highlight more individuals in the strength game, just like our guests today. Also, want to take this time to thank our sponsors. Samson Equipment has been providing uncompromising quality for over 40 years. Samson products are long-lasting and made of the highest quality equipment on the market. Each project is built from the ground up with the ability to customize every need. The team at Samson focuses on developing the highest quality relationships with their customers, in addition to providing them unparalleled quality and every piece of equipment bearing the Samson name. Learn more about Samson's professional weight room solutions and the Samson standard at samsonequipment.com. Also want to thank our sponsor, Cerberus Strength. Trusted since 2012, Cerberus is making the best strongman, powerlifting, and strength sport equipment and accessories, ensuring the ultimate competitive edge. Every one of their products is tried, tested, and proven by top-level athletes worldwide. So if you're in the market for the highest quality strength and conditioning gear and equipment, be sure to check out CerberusStrength.com and use our promo code STRENGTH_GAME to save on your next order. Also want to thank our sponsor, Sport Kilt. Born in Scotland and stitched in America, Sport Kilt offers the highest quality custom kilts and accessories. Every sport kilt is made in the USA of machine washable polyester blend fabric, offering an alternative to the traditional heavy wool kilt. Check out the No Pants All Glory selection of kilts and shop the best collection of high quality American-made sport kilts and accessories at sportkilt.com and use promo code TSG to receive an extra 10% off your next order. And in this week's episode, I am joined by Cole Hergott. Cole is the head strength and conditioning coach at Trinity Western University in Langley, BC, Canada. He is entering his sixth season at TWU, overseeing all 14 teams and over 300 athletes. Prior to Trinity Western, he spent time as an intern coach at Simon Fraser University in 2018 and a student intern at TWU from 2015 to 2018. Hergott was the head strength coach at a private facility in Langley, British Columbia, Coastal Athletics from 2016 to 2018, as well as strength coach at Meadowridge School in 2018. Hergott is heavily involved in the profession outside of just coaching. He was a board member for the Canadian Strength and Conditioning Association, as well as an advisory board member for the BC Province for the National Strength and Conditioning Coaches Association, NSCA. He has also written multiple articles for both Simplifaster and Teambuildr and has been featured on multiple podcasts and spoken at conferences on topics ranging from speed training and large groups to developing weight room culture. A former Olympic weightlifter, he was competitive for 5 years until retiring last year after the birth of his second daughter, but continues to train and stay active. He is an avid lifter and enjoys being active with his family by going on walks and bike rides with his wife and kids when he's not training in the weight room. Like I said, I'm excited to have him on the show today. So with all that said, let's get in the game with Coach Cole Hergott. What's going on, everybody? Today we are starting it off hot. We've got Coach Cole Hergott on the show from the Great White North up in Canada. How you doing today, Coach?
I'm doing great, Nick. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm pretty sure you have to be the first person from Canada we have on. So we're breaking through the barriers a little bit. So I'm glad to welcome you on the show today and excited to get talking with you a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm excited to share what we do in the Great White North.
I don't know if that's a normal thing that people say for it, but or if it's derogatory, but um Hey, I'm excited to have you on. I know you got a lot of unique things going on with yourself, your kind of system, how you actually coach and how you work with your teams. Like Canadian system's a little bit different with the university. We're gonna dive all into that stuff, but before we kind of get into a little bit of your coaching style and like what you do with your players and like kind of all the other things that you have with wearing multiple hats, how did you kind of get involved into sports yourself? Like, what did you kind of play growing up, leading into kind of how you still train nowadays?
Absolutely. So I was relatively athletic, or I thought I was athletic when I was a kid. I'm from actually Saskatchewan, which is right in the middle of Canada. Really small town. So like my school that I went to when I was a kid from K to 12 had 175 kids. So my grad class had like 14 students. So in that really small pond, I was the big fish. I was, the kid that played all the sports. I played, baseball, hockey, badminton, volleyball, baseball, kind of everything. But ice hockey was kind of my go-to. Was I wanted to go to the NHL and kind of the classic Canadian, hockey dream kind of thing. And so I kind of fell in love with sports at a young age. And as I got older, I kind of fell into the training side of it. So when I was probably 14 or 15, maybe even a little bit younger, I started to, just do body weight exercises and kind of started to experience the aesthetic changes as well. I mean, puberty helped with that too, but also just the changes in my performance, and really fell in love with the off season. Essentially, just loved, the dream time of like, man, this is going to help me get faster. This is going to, I'm going to score goals. I'm going to, do all this great stuff because I'm, doing push-ups and, going for a 5K run and whatever it might have been. And so that's kind of where my love of training started, was to help with my performance, and then also appearance side as well. And then I chose to kind of drop all my other sports and just pursue hockey when I was probably 16 or 17, and kind of went full into that. Ended up playing junior B hockey up north in Saskatchewan, where it's extremely, extremely cold, and pretty isolated, but it was a really good experience for me. And then I ended up going out to here, where I am now, actually, Trinity Western University, to pursue my academics as well as play for the men's hockey team out here. So I played for 1 year here, but through that time was, continuing to train as an athlete, trying to get better. And then obviously the ego was in there too, and trying to look better as well. And so just kind of experimented with a bunch of different things. I didn't really have a structured plan. I literally would go on Google and type in, training program for hockey players. And that's where I discovered Matt Nickel and Gary Roberts, who are two strength coaches up here in Canada. They partnered with Nike, and they came up. I think it was called The Program, and it was meant for teenage hockey players. And so I did that, and then did a bunch of other things. Went on bodybuilding.com, tried a bunch of things on there. So just kind of sunk my teeth into a whole bunch of different things training wise, and then came out to Trinity and met my first strength and conditioning coach, Andrew Hemming. And that's where I got my first, like, hey, this is a legit program, for you, and kind of follow that. And that's kind of what led me out to out west here, out to Trinity, to the school, to be exposed to strength and conditioning a little bit deeper, and kind of sink my teeth more into some, as I mentioned, kind of structured training as opposed to just whatever I found on the internet.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a very eclectic group of like sports to play. And I wouldn't expect that too from a smaller school. Like you said, like K through 12 only having like under 150 like total students there and graduating with like 14. I've talked to friends and like colleagues that are in like grew up in the Dakotas and like stuff like that, and their graduating classes they can count on one hand. So it's small, but to be able to play that many sports and like the ones all that you named, like that's a huge athletic background that you can kind of pull from. Um, Hockey's so different. I know we'll probably touch on that too. I know that's one of your go-tos, and you're working with hockey still at TWU as well. But specifically, like when you talk about like that first year of playing like at like Trinity Western, like was there something that kind of sparked? Like did it just kind of like seesaw over and finally tilt the tables that like you found out you like training more than hockey, or Was it an injury? Was it something that kind of just shifted? Like you can't, it's hard to balance like being really athletic in something and putting all your time and focus to, especially a team sport, when you're trying to be a coach as well and kind of take all that information in at a fire hose and balance the two. What was kind of the big maybe moment or like realization for you that was like, all right, I'm going to put everything into coaching and hockey's probably going to take more of a back burner now?
Well, the first thing was meeting Andrew Hemming. So when I was growing up, like I didn't know strength and conditioning was a profession. And so when I met Andrew Hemming and seeing the kind of guy he was and the care he took, I remember thinking, I want to be this guy. Like this is what I want to be, is this profession, because this I think can have a really big impact. And he had a really big impact on my life, and it was super beneficial for me. But the other thing was in our exit meeting with our hockey coach at the end of that season. So that season, I only ended up playing 2 games. So I don't want to make me sound like I'm better than I am. I'm in my small town. I was a very good athlete. When I got to the bigger ponds out west here, I realized, oh, I'm not as good as I think I am. And so I didn't the hockey program at the time was growing, and so they were, just kept getting better every year. It was relatively new, and so I kind of came in right as they were making the jump to like, hey, we're actually getting a lot better. So I ended up only playing 2 games that year, and at the end of the year, exit meeting with the coach was basically like, hey, like we're getting better. We're recruiting over you essentially, and we've got even better kids coming in. So we probably don't have a spot for you, but we see that you take your strength conditioning and nutrition stuff pretty seriously. Why don't you be a strength intern and like help it with our team? And so that was a classic example of like when one door closes, another door opens. And I was not happy at the end of that meeting, but thought, okay, well, if this is something I want to pursue anyway, why not start it now? And so that would have been probably in February or March. And so the rest of that year, I interned in the varsity weight room with Andrew Hemming, and throughout the summer a little bit too. And then ever since then, it was just like, wow, this is pretty sweet. I like this. And then that's kind of what shoved me there. So I would say meeting Andrew Hemming and then getting kicked out the door by my coach was the second thing.
Yeah, that's a hard thing to do too. Like you kind of feel like you grow up in that meeting. Like that probably it could have been 5 minutes, it could have been an hour, but in that amount of time, like you go through so many emotions to go from this was kind of my dream of playing this sport, and you really probably weren't thinking of much else outside of that, or at least that was the first thing in your focus to going, all right, well, this other idea, and I have this opportunity, but I did the same thing at my university, like being injured and then like starting to intern as well. And then your teammates that an hour ago now become kind of your athletes in a sense, and you're still the same age, you still probably hang out with each other. It's such a hard thing to kind of like draw that line and get used to it. Did you find it a little bit difficult, like interning, like understanding all those nuances and stuff, and then realizing that they're basically your classmates, they're your friends, they're your former teammates, or were you just so focused on coaching and like getting used to understanding what strength conditioning really looks like at a professional, like at a career level that you didn't even kind of pay that any mind?
The first year and a bit were for sure really difficult because, like you mentioned, like these are my friends, these are my classmates. We go to kinesiology class together, and we're both asking questions. We're kind of studying for this exam, and then an hour later, I'm telling them how to squat in the weight room. So it definitely was challenging. It made it really easy from a relationship side because I knew everybody. So it wasn't like, hi, I'm cool. I didn't have to be shy. It was like, oh, like we're in the same dorm room together. Like just do this. So it made that part a lot easier. Which me, I'm actually naturally introverted, so having those relationships already built made it a lot easier for me to coach. But once I got to my third and fourth year, I was, I was the intern. Like I didn't, especially with like the freshmen and stuff, they didn't know me as an athlete, and so it became easier to coach them. But I would say that for sure the first couple of years were pretty tough. But once I kind of set in and realized that this is what I wanted to do and pushed myself into other opportunities as well, this was yeah, pretty smooth.
Yeah, it's that's kind of an easy kind of entry point too, because I think when you get into that point, you deal with a lot of athletes, like some of them have coming from like good training experience or they're either really good athletes themselves, so they think that because they're so good on the ice or so good on the field that they're naturally going to be good in the weight room. So they have kind of that type A personality where they're going to boss people around. And I've seen a lot of interns come through or students or people shadowing and just get stomped out by like kind of an overpowering athlete in the beginning that's like, I don't want to do it this way, or this is how I do it, or maybe doesn't take criticism or like any sort of correction or feedback from someone that's not real confident with themselves. And you can lose a coach pretty early on if you don't have that. So it sounds like it was helpful. It was a little bit beneficial that you actually already had an in with some of those players and everything. But I know probably outside of hockey, you still had to develop those relationships a little bit more. And it might have been, was it any bit easier working with maybe some of the other teams, or was hockey the only team that you kind of worked with that initial year or two?
I worked that first year. I worked primarily with hockey, but I also helped with some other sports as well. I'd say, well, it's funny. I still remember my feedback forms from the strength coaches at the time, were everything like the thing that I needed to work on was chatting with people and people skills and just kind of diving into that side because I'm relatively smart naturally. And so for me, like understanding the science of training was a lot easier than, once again, for an introverted kid to kind of step outside those boundaries. But I'd say that it for sure was a huge benefit to me to kind of know them beforehand, to be a student athlete so that I understood what they were going through, whether they were on the soccer team or the basketball team. It's like, hey, like I know what it's like to have practice and then, got to get up the next day for an 8 o'clock class or an exam or whatever it might be. So I think it helped a lot. I think something else that, even just other interns like listening to this is you can be a huge value because of the age you're at, because you're the same age as the athlete. So a lot of people see that as a negative, like, oh, I'm young. Oh, I don't really, like you said, like it kind of you get snuffed out because, you're coaching people that are older than you. Like you're going to be coaching fifth year athletes and you're a second year intern. But I think that's something that a lot of people miss is, and I'm seeing that now is as the strength coach, I'm older than the athletes. I'm the old guy. I'm not as relevant. I don't understand the references. I wear ankle socks and I get made fun of, it's like little things like that. Whereas when you're an intern, you're in, like, what's going on. You can relate to them a lot easier. You can comment on, whatever's happening in the world or that video that everybody saw on TikTok or Instagram or whatever it might be. So I think that's something that helps build relationships is just being relevant and being, the same age and in the same classes and stuff. So I'd say for sure as a professional, it might seem like it's detrimental, but when you're in the day-to-day coaching and trying to build relationships, it's so much easier when you're just with them all the time.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Like the no matter what the athletes that you're bringing in, like that age kind of stays the same. So interns coming in, like that's roughly where they're starting. Like I know that some interns for strength conditioning are starting sooner, but I think it's just because there's been so much more exposure. Just as you kind of said and alluded to, and same with me, like I didn't know that this was really a profession until we got to college level at that point in time. And then it's like almost you're playing catch up. And now you're starting to see interns that are already like securing coaching, like internships or volunteer hours, like as soon as they get into their first year at university. And that was vastly different before, like even understanding that that is a viable career path. Like I know some kids that are going in and they're already picking exercise science, like knowing that they want to be a college strength coach or knowing they want to be a professional strength coach their first year. Like that's why they're going to a specific school specifically for that. And it wasn't too long ago that no one knew that this was really a career path. So it's definitely a lot different, but you're right, like being relatable to the athletes and having a good kind of common ground, like knowing the terminology, knowing some of those nuances and everything, it makes it a little bit easier for them to be open, especially someone that might be a little bit more introverted. So do you kind of shift into where like Trinity Western looks like? I know you kind of alluded to it and you talked to me a little bit before we got going and everything, like just kind of the size of the facility, like you being a one-man show and working with as many athletes, as many teams as you do. Do you have interns and stuff that kind of assist you? Because 14 teams, 300 plus student athletes, barely 1,000 foot square weight room. Like, how are you able to manage that if it's by yourself, or are you working with some people to kind of help you fix that coach to athlete ratio a little bit?
Yeah, so we don't have the biggest space we're working with, but I do get to take on undergrad interns every year. And so the size of my team varies on how many applicants I get, but in the last couple years, it's grown quite a bit. So I think in my first few years, I would only have like six or so interns, and now this past 2 years, I've had 12. So that's almost enough to have one per team, which scheduling wise, it doesn't allow me to place one intern with each team, unfortunately. But yeah, I basically get 12 extra set of hands for testing, for coaching. It allows me to work on my mentorship abilities by trying to develop these young coaches and help them get to where they want to in their profession. But yeah, as far as the help, I have that. I also have a kind of like a part-time, for lack of a better word, a graduate assistant. He's used to be on our track and field team, and he was one of my interns, and now he's just a local high school PE teacher. But he helps out with our track and field team a little bit and helps me run some sessions. So while I'm the only paid strength and conditioning coach, I do have a good chunk of people that are helping me out.
Yeah, that helps a lot too, especially when you talk about being a one-man show and like trying to do sports science, strength conditioning, nutrition, kind of assist in all those manners, whether it be on the field, on the ice, in the weight room. That's a lot to kind of do by yourself, but being able to have some help and kind of mentor some young coaches that are interested in the profession. They might not be college, or they might go professional, they might go high school route or whatever, but it's a huge experience, and I think it's a good kind of quid pro quo for each other, and it helps out in the long run. So like you talked about when you first got going, like trying to build that confidence in yourself, and then understanding like maybe you're a little bit more introverted than what maybe people perceive as a strength coach, kind of like leading a group, like kind of barking orders, or just kind of commanding a room. Like that sometimes has to be developed a lot more with people. Do you find like practical approaches? Do you see some of like the interns that you have kind of lacking in that confidence as well? And how do you kind of like either show them ways to kind of like combat that, or like kind of teach them about like the things that you had to go through in order to like get to the point you are now and be more confident as like a head coach?
So one of the huge benefits I had in my professional career was I work at the school I went to school at. So when I came back, I knew all the coaches. I knew like I was only gone for 1 year to do my master's or to start my master's and then came back. And so when I came back as the head strength coach, it was almost the same thing we chatted about before. Like I was now the boss of athletes that I was literally in class with 2 years ago or 2 years before that. And so that first year was very challenging from, trying to establish myself as a professional. But I know that when I look at my interns now, I think they do lack a little bit of that confidence. And it's kind of the same thing with me, like where I kind of understood the science and then kind of needed to branch out. Because if I ask my interns a question or we have a conversation, it's like you guys know the answer to that. Like you tell the athletes or you demonstrate this or you coach. And so what I actually came up with, because I was super frustrated with athletes or my interns not engaging the way I wanted them to. And I remember like ranting to my wife the one night, like, I just don't understand. Like they're not doing it and whatever. And she's like, hey, they're not you. They maybe don't want it as bad as you did when you're an intern. Like you need to give them set goals. And so now what I have is every week I give them a certain task and they have to complete that task. So it's, hey, you need to learn 5 athletes' names. You need to chat with 5 athletes. And then the next week is you need to coach 3 athletes. And the next one is you need to ask a question. You need to, it kind of just builds on each other. And we have a group chat and they have to comment in the group chat kind of their experience. Like, hey, I chatted with three athletes, a couple athletes I'd never met before. It was super nerve-wracking, but at the end of the day, it wasn't as bad as I thought. So just helping all the interns learn from each other through kind of their experience. But that's kind of what I've done with my interns to help them kind of branch out. And I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from them about, because it is kind of intimidating, especially if you're in your, second year, third year, and you're coaching these fourth, fifth year athletes who probably know more than the interns do about training, or hopefully if I've done my job right. But these tasks allow them to focus on, just do this one thing. Just make sure you're doing this, you're providing a good environment and you're promoting safety and whatever it might be, instead of just coming in and saying, hey, you know, intern, because it's kind of can be pretty vague. And the thing that helped me when I was an intern, that unfortunately my interns don't get to now. So when I was an intern 10 years ago, we had like open gym times. So it was the weight room would open at, 7 a.m. and it would close at 6 p.m. And athletes just had to come get their workout. And there was no structure. There was like some teams mandated their athletes come 2 to 3 times a week. Some teams didn't. And so sometimes you wouldn't see an athlete for 2, 3 weeks. And there'd be times where, I'd be interning for, maybe a 2 hour shift, and there'd be like two athletes come in. And there'd be other times where it'd be so busy in our small space again that athletes would walk in and they'd be like, whoa, there's no room for me. And they'd have to turn around and leave. So the benefit as an intern was, because there was no structure, that there were always people starting workouts, needing help with warm-ups, and there were always people needing help setting up the racks. And so as an intern at the time, I had to step up. And so because the head strength coach was helping those five athletes. So now, well, three more athletes just walked in. So it was like, okay, well, I got to step up and I got to help them. And that really allowed me to understand, what it meant to take charge of the room. Because again, I am relatively introverted, but it was one of those things where like somebody had to do the job. It wasn't, you had to put your personal feelings and your biases and your fears aside, and you had to get the job done. And through doing that more and more, I fell in love with doing that with talking about strength and conditioning, with providing answers, with answering questions, and it allowed me to become more extroverted in the space. And so again, that's almost why now with my interns, I've had to create those tasks, because when I started 6 years ago, I implemented team training sessions, which has been a huge blessing for logistics and all that stuff. But it doesn't allow, it allows me to be in charge of every session, allows me to run every warm up and, hey, this is what we're doing, and go and, kind of manipulate things. Whereas once again, when I was an intern, the strength coach could only do that, for a few of the athletes. So the interns now don't have to step up as much. And so that's why I've had to create that task list so that they do step up and they actually get something out of it. Because I've had interns in the past where when I ask for feedback and stuff, it's like, well, the internship's kind of boring. Like the athletes know what they're doing. It's like, yeah, but like, what about talking with them? What about, pushing them to get better and whatnot? And so that's where I kind of came up with, okay, well, I gotta make you better by me being better. And so the past year or so has been awesome. Like my interns have been phenomenal the last little bit. So
Yeah, it's like when you first started and it just being open hours, like you were kind of a product of the environment. And as hungry as you were to like kind of get coaching, you got like as many reps as you wanted because you could just float around the room and just touch base with different athletes and start, finish, like help them with questions and things like that. I don't know if it's athletes think that there's too much structure, like you said, and that there's like not a good way for them to like interject and get into it. But I think a lot of intern coaches see the finish line and see what like a head coach looks like, or see like what a full-time coach looks like, and see where they're starting from, and just don't know like the route and like what the things that you need to do in order to actually get to that point where things look seamless for a coach. Like seeing things look like they're running smoothly, but it's a lot of work behind the scenes, and it's a lot of like time spent coaching and understanding some of the nuances where you can almost project and guess what an athlete's going to do next, or what a training session is going to look like before it even occurs. And that's reps and like having a feel for just the room and the flow of a session and things like that, that I think what you did, like setting goals and having tasks for those interns is super helpful too, because if they already lack the confidence and they come into it and they've got some players that you've been working with for multiple years that are about to graduate, like they know what's expected of them. They could probably coach 10 times better than the interns. So they have to basically play catch up. And I don't know if some of the interns nowadays just aren't like as forward thinking and like hungry to like actually kind of do some of the stuff on their own and really like you did when you first got started. And I did the same thing, just like search for different programs, like search for other coaches, like reach out to people on their own. Nowadays you feel like you have to like tell them like this is kind of how you get to this place. This is expected of you if you really want to do well in this. You can't just complete a vague internship and feel like you're ready for a full-time job. It's you're not, like, in a sense, like, or you're not going to last very long.
Yeah, yeah. There's two things I think that a lot of young coaches need to understand when they are kind of going up, and the one I think is to to get experience outside of where you want to work. So when I was an undergrad intern here, I knew this is eventually dream scenario where I was going to work. I wanted to be the head strength coach at Trinity Western University. But when I was in my undergrad, I still did personal training. I worked at a private facility. I interned with pro teams, with national teams, with basically anybody that would let me come and just shadow and chat with coaches and all these other experiences. Because what I didn't want is I didn't want to become just a carbon copy of Andrew Hemming, who was a strength coach at the time, and nothing changes and everything just kind of stays the same. I wanted to be the best Cole Hergott I could be. And so I knew the only way I could do that was by learning and understanding how to train youth athletes, how to train older clients, how to train, once again, pros. I worked with the wheelchair rugby team for a year or so, or maybe even 2 years. And so having all those experiences and learning to communicate with a grandmother and then her grandson and then a pro athlete who's making $5 million and then a next gen athlete who is trying to make the national squad, having all of those, again, as an introvert, learning to communicate with them was huge. Learning the different programming nuances, obviously, for all of those different populations is going to be very different. And so that allowed me to then step into this job and make what I perceive to be appropriate changes to progress the strength and conditioning program forward from an internship side, from the athlete side, from the sports science side, because I got all those experiences. Whereas, if you're an intern at, UCLA, you don't want to just work at UCLA and then become an assistant at UCLA and then become the head at UCLA because you didn't really get the breadth of experience that you need. And so a lot of coaches talk about, well, do you need a master's degree? Do you need a PhD? Do you need, and education is one thing, but I think a lot of young coaches just need more experience in different scenarios, and that will help serve you way more than any other education. Now, obviously, you might need to get a master's degree if you're going to work at a higher level institution, but while you're going through your undergrad, chat with other coaches, go ask if you can shadow them, listen to podcasts, like whatever you can do to learn from people outside of where you want to work it's just like training with our athletes. We always talk about, well, general training should be general. You don't want to just do sport specific training all year round. So as coaches, it's the same thing. We should do general training with our coaching as far as trying to make the base of our coaching pyramid as wide as possible so that when we get more specific, like I am now training, university athletes, that I have that base of understanding of different concepts and what works and what doesn't from different coaches and from my own experience so that I can now apply it in an appropriate, training stimulus to the people that I'm currently working with.
Yeah, it's a great point. And it's like broadening out and actually building your base a little bit more versus just like understanding like, hey, I want to work in this at this school, this region, this conference, or this sport. Like you can't just rush to get to that point because I think a lot of times people get there and they lose the forest for the trees and they're so blindsided by just working with this sport. The same as like you being with your athletic career, like having so many different like training aspects and like skills and like character traits that you build from those different sports, you're able to kind of focus that towards like your hockey career. The same with coaching. Like if you're able to like work with different populations and different settings for different goals, different age groups, like that only serves you a better and more fulfilling purpose when you get to like whatever the setting you want to work with is, because you can go back on some of those scenarios, all those coaching reps, and be able to kind of give the best product forward. And it might not be the same type of scenario, might not be specific to it, but you can recall on all those things, and it just gives you, like you said, a broader experience to like call upon it. And it might also like shift your focus, because I think a lot of coaches come in, like interns will come in and they're so dead set on working in one specific like population, and then they intern for a semester or for a certain amount of time and they realize it's not exactly what they wanted. That was the same thing with me. Like I was going in, I thought athletic training was what I wanted to do, and then I realized very quickly that that is not what I want to do. And I'm sure people do the same thing. And I've seen that coaches come in where they're in the college setting and they find their love for high school, or they realize like, oh, well, the private setting is a little bit more for me. I like working one-on-one or working with smaller populations. So being able to actually kind of go through that stuff early in your career and vet all the different sides of strength conditioning or performance, that's the best thing you could possibly do. So kind of touching on like you getting into kind of that dream role for you, like being at Trinity Western, like you knew you wanted to come back at some point. Or is there maybe, I'm naive probably, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners, like especially in the United States, like is there anything different from like the university setting in Canada? Like, and then because I know especially hockey, there's a lot of differences. I want to touch on that too, like just the career path for a hockey player that wants to go professional. But specifically first in the university, is there anything different from how you guys kind of operate, or kind of maybe some of the rules that you have to work with under as a strength coach, like working with that population?
Yes, and now I'm not an expert on NCAA rules, but from my understanding, from what I know is there are no rules essentially up here in Canada. So there's no dead period. There's no time where I'm not allowed to speak to athletes. There's no time where I'm not allowed to coach them or hold them accountable. So, for example, we're just, at the time of this recording, we're just finishing up our winter break. And before athletes went on break, I sent out the expectations as far as you need to complete, 3 lifts a week. You need to get, X amount of conditioning, speed sessions, boom, boom, boom. And then just last week, for the teams that came back, I sent them so we used Train Heroic for our training, and I sent them their compliance report. So like this is who did what, and I'm allowed to do that. I do that throughout the summer, pretty much every month, just to keep tabs on everybody. So yeah, so that's I think the main difference from any training like in the NCAA, where like there's dead periods and you're not allowed to coach certain athletes and mandate any training. I mean, I technically can't mandate training because it all goes up to the sport coach, but we can mandate technically whatever we want, whenever we want, and it just allows us hopefully to keep athletes engaged for longer.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. That's that even like in NCAA, like all the divisions and everything, there's so many different kind of nuanced rules to it, and it's just so fluid. It's ever changing every year. So it's interesting to kind of see that, and it definitely throws a different wrench at you too when obviously like the coaches are going to dictate like how important it is to you, but hopefully being there for such amount of time, like they understand like the benefit of working with you and the rest of like your staff and like that development season too, in order for them to be actually successful for their playing careers and their like competitive season as well. So with what it comes to like hockey and everything too, like you talked about your time like K through 12 like playing, and then going to play like junior Bs, and then like going to university. Like for us and for anybody that doesn't do hockey, because like I understand it a little bit but didn't play past high school, but for everybody that doesn't understand, like that just seems ass backwards. Like to go to juniors and then go to university and to try to get to a place where you can play higher division and then play professional. Like explain like a little bit like of maybe the career path for someone that wants to get into like professional hockey, and then like maybe a little bit of the mindset that you have for with your college hockey players that are obviously like trying to be their best so that they can go professional as well.
Absolutely. So the dream scenario for any kid playing hockey in Canada would be you start playing, yeah, like minor league hockey when you're younger, and then the hope is that you end up playing for like a AAA team, which is like the highest level when you're, or like a rep team when you're, maybe 14, 15, and then make the jump to playing junior hockey when you're 16 or 17, so still in high school, whether that's junior A or major junior. So major junior would be like in the WHL, QMJHL, OHL, which is the highest level of junior hockey you can play in Canada. That's where pretty much all of the NHL draft picks come from in Canada is major junior. So the goal is that you're playing in that league when you're 16, 17, so that when it's your draft year, when you're 18, then you've got a couple years under your belt there. You've, got some good stats, and then you get drafted to play in the NHL when you're 18, and then maybe go play in the minor leagues for a couple years, and then you go into the show and you light it up. But the way I was hoping to kind of do it was, so I played junior B, which is two levels below that top level. Um, was my goal was then to go play a university at Trinity, and then just go play pro in some league in Europe. So there's an endless number of leagues, especially in Europe at different divisions. Now, there's not really pro leagues in Canada outside of the NHL or the American Hockey League. So for most of our guys here are kind of on that same path that I wanted, where the guys that come in, and our coach has told me this. He's like, I only recruit kids that want to go play pro. I don't want kids to come here and it's just like they're circling the drain and like this is the end of the road and they kind of just like waste their time here. He's like, I want kids that are hungry to keep getting better. And that's shown in kind of the caliber of athlete that we've been able to bring in over the last couple of years. Um, and so my goal with our kids and kind of their goal is they come here, play university sport for, their 4 or 5 years or so. And then with that, they can make the jump to, maybe somewhere in North America. So we've had a couple guys play in the East Coast Hockey League, which is two steps below the NHL. We've had some guys actually play a game in the American Hockey League, but most of our guys that go play pro will go over to Sweden, or we had a guy go to the UK. We've had kind of guys go all over Europe because there's so many leagues, and it just kind of depends on what level they want to go play at, and what they're comfortable doing, because some of the living situations or the pay situations over there, depending on the division, aren't that great. But that's what I was hoping to do until I kind of stepped into the strength and conditioning world. But most of our guys now, that's kind of their eyes are either playing in the East Coast League here in North America, or kind of making the jump overseas for a couple of years and getting to experience that life.
Yeah, I appreciate that because sometimes the like as many leagues as there are and like kind of the nuances of it, if you don't like grow up in it as much and you're not surrounded by it, like it changes and it can also get like super confusing about like what's the best like kind of career path, like what's the ideal. Like everybody comes from a different kind of lineage, everybody comes like about a different way to try to get to the top, but there are like kind of the dream scenarios and there are some like outlier ones that you can still play at a high level. It's just all dependent on your skill level, but also what you're comfortable doing too, like playing overseas and things like that. So it's definitely an interesting way. And it's just hockey in Canada too. Like you said, like some of those kids they're 14, they're about to be the next phenom and they're already dead set on that. Like I've talked to friends that work in like hockey, like in Michigan and like Minnesota area too, like our private facilities, and their parents are driving like 2 hours away, or they're dropping them off at like camps for like thousands of dollars to play hockey. And I mean, that's the scenario, that's a dream scenario for it. So it's definitely a cool thing that don't seem to like necessarily get to the same emphaticism that we get in the US that you guys have for it. But I mean, that's why you're usually better than us at the end of the day sometimes. So, hey, so what kind of shifted for you then too? Because like going into Olympic weightlifting for a couple of years and like kind of shifting gears to like how you were training. I know you did that for about 5 years and then kind of shifted gears again, like when your family got a little bit bigger. But what was the reason for you to kind of like get back and be competitive, maybe get on the platform, try something new, like after your team like sport career was over?
Yeah, so when I finished hockey, when I retired, quote unquote, after that exit meeting with my coach, yeah, I kind of left it up in the air of like, well, what do I want to do for my training? Because obviously I still loved that and wanted to pursue it. And so for the next, oh, so that would have been in what, 2015? So for the next like 4 years of my undergrad and even as a GA was just like general training. So I didn't do like a full-on bodybuilding split or anything, but I was definitely training more for aesthetics than I was for performance at the time. But just jump from program to program. So I did like Joe Ken's tier system. I did some French contrast training. I did some stuff from Pavel Tsatsulian. I did like just a whole bunch of different stuff. Just jumping from program to program. I did a lot of 5-3-1. My goal, kind of like my loose goal at the time, was to hit the 1,000 pound club, which I never did. I think I hit to like 985 and then I don't know, got bored with it, or I don't know what happened. But anyway, in 2016, I went on a travel study with Trinity Western. So I would have been in my third year at university, I believe, or going into my third year. And we went to the Rio Olympics. And that's where I got exposed to Olympic weightlifting for the first time. And I got to see it live. And I just loved it. And so I think I bought a few more tickets. I ended up going probably to 3 or 4 different um, events of Olympic weightlifting. And when I came home, it was like, wow, this is something I want to try out. So I tried it for maybe 2 or 3 weeks and didn't like it. I, I didn't have the mobility. I did like snatching was tough. I couldn't catch in the bottom. I was like, okay, this ain't for me. And I went back to doing what I was doing, and kind of just left it. Then a few years later, when I was doing my master's degree at the University of British Columbia, so just like an hour down the road from here, um, I don't even remember why, but I started to pick it up again. I think one of my fellow graduate assistants or one of the undergrad interns was an Olympic weightlifter, and maybe she kind of poked me on it. Anyway, all I know is that Christmas I got Olympic weightlifting shoes. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll try this Olympic weightlifting thing again. And I started to enjoy it a lot more because now I could hit those positions. And I started to train a little bit. And the that other intern, she challenged me, she said, hey, we have a weightlifting club here and there's a meet in March and I think you should do it. And at the time it would have been probably, beginning of February. So I was like, okay, I'll maybe give it a go. And so I kept training for it, and I went to that meet. I went for 6 for 6. So I said all 3 snatches, all 3 cleans, and just fell in love with it that day. I enjoyed the training part, but the community, how supportive everybody was, how nerve-wracking it was, to get on the platform again and be like in a competitive environment. I just loved it. And so for the next 5 years, I trained for that. I tried to make the provincial team, unsuccessfully. I crushed out PRs every chance I could, like just kept getting stronger and just fell in love with the process. And I ended up getting, I ended up doing it by myself, like just not programming for myself, but just getting stuff online for probably the first couple years. And then the last 3 years, I worked with a online weightlifting coach out here in British Columbia, and they just helped me take everything to the next level. And I found that actually helped me as a coach by having a coach, so that I could once again learn what it's like to be told to do something that you don't want to do, and then you got to do it because that's what's in the program. And so that helped me out a lot. Um, Through that time, I had our first daughter, Sophia, in 2021. And well, I don't say there was no issues, but obviously Olympic weightlifting, there's a big time component from training, and so there'd be training sessions on the weekend I'd have to do, and took away from family time a little bit. And my wife was not a huge fan of that, as I have an obsessive nature, and so when I do something, I got to do it full go. And so this Olympic weightlifting thing, along with obviously the time commitments of a strength and conditioning coach in the university setting, kind of added to my plate. And so we chatted about it, and I was already contemplating retiring at the end of that season. So that would have been kind of in May or June. But that October, so the October before that, we had our second daughter, Millie. And her birth was extremely complicated and kind of a long story, but it was kind of in that moment that I realized I need to be at home. I need to be with my family, and I need to kind of take a step away from this Olympic weightlifting thing, at least for the time being. And so that would have been, yeah, the October of 2023. So yeah, so it's been just over a year of me retiring from that. And in that time, it's actually been a huge blessing from a family standpoint. From, when we go on vacation, I don't need to go find a gym so I can do my snatches. It's like, hey, I can just do a body weight workout. Like I don't have to, you know, financially it's helpful. Once again, time wise, it's helpful. But the other thing too is now I can actually do things that I want my athletes to do. So at the time, Olympic weightlifting was huge because it helped me again understand the role of a coach and how it feels to be an athlete. But the thing I didn't like about it was when I was programming things for athletes, I had to stick to my training program when I was working out. So when I was programming stuff for them, it was like, I think this is going to work. Doing this drop set or doing this whatever leg workout, like I think it'll work for you. I think it'll be tough. I don't know, and not really fully understanding it. Whereas for the last year or so, I do everything before I give it to my athletes. So I'll try new stuff. I'll play around with the workouts they're doing. I'll try new sprints and jumps and all that stuff, and just generally train for athleticism, or just being a fit, healthy dad. And I always tell my athletes, I said, I'm not super strong, I'm not super athletic, I don't look great, but if I stay this exact same way for the next 20 years and I still can squat the same, I can still sprint the same, man, I'm gonna look like an absolute beast. So I have to just keep doing what I'm doing, and hopefully it stays that way. But again, it's really helped me enhance what I think is enhance the programs I give to my athletes by going through what they're going through and being able to relate to them. And hey, yeah, I know this sucks. Just so you know, like this superset, this is going to suck, but it won't be so bad. Or tomorrow you're going to be quite sore, but the next week it'll be fine. Whereas the previous 5 years, I had an understanding of obviously what training was like, but not to the same level that I do now. So Olympic weightlifting was in my life for the right time and the right reasons, and now it's gone, I think, at the right time for the right reasons, and I might eventually go back to it, but I'm enjoying not squatting and snatching and cleaning super heavy 4 days a week, and getting to have a little bit of freedom with what I do.
Yeah, that's a big transition too. And I think you said it pretty well too. Like, yeah, you're playing the long game, just kind of working on general athleticism, but it's nice when your own training kind of can tie back into what you're doing professionally and like what your athlete's program looks like. And I've fallen into that trap before too, like competing in like strongman and Highland games. Like neither of those really translate over to like developing a lot of athleticism specifically for like the variety of sports I work with. Like I'm not going to ask my athletes to like I'm not going to ask any of like my beach volleyball girls to like throw a hammer or like throw a caber, and I'm not going to ask my baseball guys to pick up Atlas stones and like tear themselves up before they go pitch. So it's hard to like find that line between like really diving into your own training, even if it does have some benefits, because training in itself in the weight room too is still removed from what their sport looks like. So if you already are doing kind of a strength sport and it doesn't really tie back into just general athleticism or like specific to their sport, and it ties back into what their sport is, like you kind of further the gap between like it actually being super beneficial. And yeah, it's the same as like I think an intern too. Like we talked about like that relationship aspect and really understanding like how you speak to the athlete, like understanding like what the program feels like, what the expectations are going to be, how sore you're going to be after you do it. You can talk from experience, but it does help a lot more too when it's like fresh in your mind and you've experienced it like recently too. It just kind of helps a lot. And obviously, like going through and being competitive again is awesome, and like being able to do that, but it just gives you more kind of tools in your toolbox to be able to program for your athletes. You talk about like time commitments and everything too, and obviously like your family expanding too. That's a big time commitment. It's a big factor that kind of comes on your plate, and we kind of know like strength conditioning, like coaches, the amount of time that's kind of asked of you. And I have that same kind of obsessive mindset when it comes to training and when it comes to coaching too. Like you don't mean to kind of like get stuck in it, but you have to kind of reel yourself back in to get home at like a decent time. But how do you kind of like balance now wearing so many hats like at the university and then being able to like get home, spend time with the family, and like even carve out some time so you can train too, because you're running the department like as the only paid person there for so many teams. You're doing sports science, you're doing strength conditioning, all those things, mentoring those interns. Like, how do you kind of manage your time and make sure that like you're invested enough, but you can still get away and get back home?
Yeah, so for me, I'm an early riser, so I get up and get my training done before I coach. So that way it's done, it's out of the way. And when I'm done my work day, I can go home and be a dad and be a husband. So um, part of it, I used to do it even when I was an intern because I hated coaching and walking around and like telling athletes to lift when I hadn't lifted yet because I was super antsy. It was like, oh, like I just want to do it. Whereas now, if I've already done my session, it's like, no, I'm done. You guys can work hard now. I've already done everything. But if I, yeah, and I've chatted with my wife about this, and we've gone back and forth because she's like, you need to sleep more, and you should just sleep in. It's like, well, but now I'm not getting home till after dinner because like she knows how important training is to me, and it's like, well, then I got to train after work, and I would rather train early in the morning, and then that way, once again, when I'm done work, I just go home. But I find that things that for me, I enjoy my work. I love what I do, um, and I also love my family. And as we just chat about, it's really tough to balance those two things. Um, but I think that having a great support system like my wife, someone who knows that I love my job, she knows that I love what I do, and she allows me to do it to the extent that I do, but she's also not afraid to tell me when to reel it in, to hey, like, you need to be home, no, you can't go, you can't take that extra training client on a Saturday that wanted you to run a session, or when it is a holiday, I always talk to my wife because for me it's like, well, I'm more than happy to go in on a holiday Monday and run a few sessions, but I always run it by her first. And usually I can weasel my way to run maybe one session on those holidays, um, but yeah, I think like in the university setting, it's a lot easier because there are those set breaks. Like there's the winter break, so we just are finishing. We've had a month-long break essentially, where I'm working maybe a few hours a day, and then in the summertime. So for us, we finish classes at the end of April. So we basically have May, June, July, and then some of our teams like our fall sports will start back in August. But I basically have 3.5 months of you know, chill time where again, I'm working, a few hours a day for the athletes that are local, but otherwise it's a lot of family time. And so it's more just the balance of it more just comes in the yearly schedule. So I'm about to again start, working a lot more, but then in the summertime, I'm dad a lot more. And so over the course of a year, it kind of balances out. But there are going to be imbalances in that overall flow, which I think is fine. It's kind of just like a sport. Like you don't play your sport 3 days a week, all year. You do it 5 days a week for 3 or 4 months, and then you don't do it at all, and then you do it again for 5 days a week, and so that allows me to, I think, enjoy being a dad more when I'm away from it. And then same thing with coaching. Like I can't wait to coach, this week and next week when the athletes are back, because this last month when there's, 3 or 4 athletes in the weight room drives me nuts. I hate it. I hate when there's nothing to do and there's no coaching. And so I'm really looking forward to that. And then again, by the time May comes around, it's like, holy smokes, I'm exhausted. I can't wait to just sit around and be a dad and go for walks and all that stuff. And then again, when August comes around, I can't wait to coach. So there isn't really balance in, if you look at my day-to-day life, but if you look at a yearly standpoint, I think it balances out quite well.
Yeah, I think after when you kind of look at it in that scale, it'll start to even itself out. And I try to have that argument too when it comes to working in the season. Like when we get to like summer, we get to like winter times and we have a break, like you need to take that break because sometimes you're working 80-hour weeks or you're there on the weekends, like you're there on holidays, like you said, like when people look at like, oh, you have a school schedule, like it must be nice to have your summers off. It's like that's not necessarily the case. It's whenever the teams are off is when I have off. So when you have that time, you take it because the same with like getting your 40 hours a week or whatever you're like allotted paid for, that'll all even it out in time, like over the course of the year. And the same with like being able to spend time with family and stuff like that too. Like it'll start to balance itself out as you go, but it's definitely not balanced during parts of the year. And sometimes it's not in your favor, sometimes it is in your favor. But making sure that you still carve out that time and you're kind of strict with it and like setting up a daily schedule like you have it is a good thing because you can bang out what you need to do like for yourself and like as a person, like as a coach, like individually and your stuff in the morning, coach, and then go home and like kind of shut the door on all that stuff and be a family man again, like that's huge. And having that balance, I think, is what keeps a lot of coaches sane and from going overboard and like just investing all your time, like at the office, like at the weight room. So that's a good approach for anybody that even an intern too, because the sooner you can kind of start that, the better. Because that, if you want to be a coach for the long term, like that's, you're going to have to go through that shift at some point in time during your career. And if you can already understand that and maybe like get ahead of the curve with it, I think you're better for it because it's gonna hurt when you get to the point where people are like, oh well, we gotta grind this out. I was like, that's not the mentality anymore. Like I'm better at coaching in year like 12 than I was in year one. So the amount of time it takes me to do a job like in this going into this year is not the same amount of time it took me my first year when I had no idea what I was doing. So I've earned that time back being better equipped and more experienced in what I'm doing. I'm sure you probably feel the same way going into year six now.
Oh, 100%. I have my daily to-do list, my weekly to-do list, and it gets smoother and easier to do every time. Now, the negative side of being a strength coach with a whole bunch of things to do and wearing a bunch of hats is when I have that free time, I just fill it with, oh, then now I have time to do this thing. And then I add something else to the plate and it becomes more and more. And so I was actually reflecting on it now that we're kind of at the end of the year. Over the past few years, the things I've changed and it's like, wow, I didn't do as much stuff in my first couple of years because like you said, it just took me longer to program. It took me longer to have meetings with coaches. It took me longer to do all this stuff. But when you get more efficient, instead of, oh, I'm going to have more time to sleep in or to read a book, it's like I just fill it with doing more things that are hopefully beneficial, for athletes and our department. And then I end up working the same amount. I'm just doing more work.
Yeah, I know that feeling exactly because you become like with the experience and the time, like you become more efficient at what you were doing. And then you start freeing up time and you start taking on extra side projects. And then I start looking at my office and there's like piles of like things that I want to do. And then now I'm reflecting, I'm like, all right, there's way too much on my plate. Even if like the coaching stuff is kind of like you could put it on the back burner because you're so you're so well attuned to it that you could pick it back right away. You don't have to kind of stay on top of it like you did in your first couple of years. But now I'm going through that same process of being like a novice in different things. And that adds as much time to my plate as it did with coaching. I'm not as obsessed with it and it doesn't kind of take up as much time and of my life as it did because that's like my career, but it's still enough that when you start kind of adding all those pennies together, like it, your time is gone.
Yeah.
And there's definitely some probably better uses of my time or even having some downtime that I could afford myself if I took a couple things off my plate.
It's tough though. Like it's especially when, you know, you sound very similar to myself. Like you have a servant heart, servant mentality. Like you want to help people. Like you're not in this for the money where it's like, okay, well, I'm going to do the least amount of work and get the most amount of money. When you have the opportunity to do what you love, which is coaching, then you kind of dive into more. And, I don't want to turn down helping somebody and, having a chance to make their life better when I genuinely think I can do that. Um, but yeah, for sure, going back to your previous question, like having a family and having a wife that I do check in with and kids that I want to make sure, that I'm their hero too. I'm not just, the hero of all the athletes here. Like I want to be my kids' hero too. And I can only do that if I actually spend time with them. So it for sure is tough to balance a whole bunch of different hats here, plus things going on outside and wanting to do more. But I think you make a good point. Like I would probably be better served by doing less and having more time to rest and spend time with my family. But it's tough. It's tough when you're young and eager and hungry and you have the opportunity to do it.
Yeah, I know that feeling. It's a hard balance. Your athletes are kind of like your extended family, but you want to make sure that that doesn't overshadow like your immediate family and like your kids and your wife and everything at home because the time commitment sometimes seems like we said like super saturated and kind of off balance at certain parts of the year. You just don't want that to bleed over when you have the opportunity to kind of stay with your family and like make the time that you're spent there well and actually be present. So it comes with time and it comes with like balancing that stuff out and realizing it and becoming more efficient with experience and everything. But I think you got a pretty good balance. What with like taking over a program, like I know you already had experience at Trinity Western, like familiarity with the coaches, the athletes, kind of the area and all that stuff from just being immersed in that and going to school there. But you still took over like right away as like a first time head coach. Like going and back, like reflecting kind of your first year, like how do you think like you've kind of changed your style or like changed your approach as a head coach? And what kind of advice do you think you would give someone to kind of prepare themselves for taking on that first time role?
Well, I definitely think I've simplified things a lot more. So when I first started out, my programs, I could look back and probably just laugh, but like my programs would be really long because it's like, well, we got to do our lower body stuff and our upper body. Oh, what about our prehab? Oh, and then we got to do this injury prevention stuff, and it just kept adding on and on and on. And now I come to the point where it's like, hey, let's do some squats, some bench, some chin ups, some abs, get out of here, and that's it. Because I've realized that number one, that if you do bigger movements better, you're going to tackle more things. So if you do a properly executed, let's say a perfectly executed front squat, you're tackling thoracic mobility, you're tackling ankle mobility, you're even doing a little bit of core work. So like you don't need to spend 10 to 15 minutes doing all that stuff as well in the program. Now, once again, I did say perfectly executed, so that doesn't happen very often, but that's the goal. And then the second thing too, I've tried to learn a lot is that I'm not the boss. I'm not the hero. As much as I want to be, and I want to call the shots, and I want to do all the things right, I need to make sure that I'm setting up our athletes for success in their sport. And so whether that's looking at it from a holistic approach of, okay, well they just spent all practice jumping, they don't need to do jumping in the weight room, or they're going to go to practice, so we're only going to do 2 sets of squats instead of 3 or 4 because I want to make sure that their legs are fresh, or we're not going to do some really heavy hamstring stuff because they're going to sprint, and just trying to look at it holistically instead of just trying to design the perfect program and it doesn't matter what else they're doing. That would be the one thing, and just yeah, just trying to make sure that I'm keeping things simple because as I'm learning more and more each year, athletes don't love to train as much as I think they do. Um, they're a lot of them, well, most of them are here because of their sport. Nobody signed as a Trinity Western Spartan because of Cole Hergott, the strength coach. I get to work with them because they want to play their sport, and so I need to take a back seat and make sure that I'm doing my best to prepare them for their sport. And so my advice to anyone kind of starting out a program would be number one, make sure you're developing relationships first. It's said 1,000 times and it'll be said 1,000 times again, but nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And so I really spent my first year developing relationships so that when I get to the point now and I do need to crack the whip a little bit, that people understand it comes from a place of love, and that, I do have a little bit of a track record of doing good work. And so it's like, hey, if you trust the process, this is kind of the results you'll get. Whereas in your first year, you don't really have a track record, you don't have anything to lean on, so you kind of need to shift more to the friendly side. And I definitely think I did a pretty good job of that. Once again, I knew everybody, and I knew the coaches because I was here before, so that was a huge help to me. But for young coaches, I'd say that would be the first thing in your first year. But the thing is, yeah, just keep it simple. Like I've gotten more and more simple as I've gone on, and I now have kind of developed a template that I use, and it makes it super simple to program, almost just like plug and play based on what we're trying to do. So obviously, if you can develop some kind of a template like that, it makes it easy, but you're always better off keeping it more simple than more complex, and just allowing athletes to kind of grow. I think we often think because we're so inundated with information on social media, or, just reading books and training, that there's all these different options, that we're like, oh, athletes are going to want to do this. They're going to want to do this. They're going to be mad if we don't try something new. When if I see our athletes and they train on their own, or like, if they're in the fitness center or they do their own stuff, like what do they do every time? They squat, they bench, they do curls, and then they leave. Like they don't, they're not trying all these super fancy things. All they care about is their bench number and their arms. So I try to keep things simple and allow them to do what I need them to do, but also, give them what they want. And 9 times out of 10, those end up being the same thing, because they just want to pick up some heavy weights and then go to practice and, win on the weekend and do it all over again. So I would say just keeping it simple, and having a system that works, but also just keeping those relationships first and foremost is going to be your biggest time suck, for lack of a better word. Like, it's going to take the most time, but at the end of the day, it's going to pay off the most.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's huge. Like keeping programming simple and being able to kind of build off the relationships and develop those things and continue to work on those things. That's huge. And you're right, like that first year, it's hard to kind of like point to prior success or like kind of get them to buy into the process when they're just really learning you. You don't really have like, oh, well, the proof's in the pudding. Like just look at past successes. Like you don't have that from the first year. So you really do have to like develop the relationships, kind of see what the athletes want, what they need from you, like where you can kind of insert yourself and kind of just keep coercing them along, like, hey, this is going to pay dividends, like keep doing this. Then the second year you can kind of like revert back to what you've already done and like almost kind of show them like, see, this is what can come to fruition like after all the hard work you put in over the course of time. It's hard a lot of times for, I think, athletes and anybody like to see where you're currently at and know where you want to go and just not be able to kind of connect the two together. And training oftentimes is kind of hard to do that because you can see maybe changes in the mirror. You can see like strength numbers go up. Like sometimes your performance may be an indicator, but it's not like cause and effect. So you can't do that every single day. It takes a lot longer for that buy-in to kind of build in. And like sometimes it's just like a light bulb or like a click moment with athletes where they're invested and they trust you or they trust the program. And not all of them are gonna click at that same time. So it's a constant process of kind of keeping that like fire burning in them and then keeping that relationship alive. And year one is always interesting to like set your expectations and kind of get them on the same page. You're working, I think, a lot more collectively in that because if you kind of just throw the hammer down, especially like in charge of that many teams in a department, you're going to lose the majority of them. And I think a lot of times when you do that, the easiest person to replace is one coach versus 300 athletes. So it's you're definitely playing with fire when it comes to that.
Yeah, it's really interesting because every situation is different. Every university is going to have, different athletes and different teams and different coaches that you work with. Um, but at the end of the day, they're all human beings. They're all people. They, communicate relatively the same. And I'll even talk to my interns about, the programming side. And as much as we want to do, sport specific training, like soccer players run, rugby players run, basketball players run, like what makes one athlete better is going to make the other athlete better. And so I think once again, early on in my career, just, trying to complicate things and make things super specific when I think you can get away with doing things a lot more simple, especially again in our situation where, there is usually just me, just one coach with a room full of athletes in a small setting. Like it makes it a lot more challenging. And while that might sound like an excuse to me, it's like I like even if I had all the space in the world, I probably wouldn't change the way I program because again, like it's gotten results. It's gotten the results that we need. It's improved the buy-in. Athletes like the training. They they show up, they work hard, they get results. Like that's all you can really ask for. And I think it's just been a seems like a long journey 5, 6 years ago. But for sure it's been worth it.
Yeah, I think just because you have all the tools and bells and whistles doesn't mean you need to just throw them into the program. Like they are just that. They're a tool that you can use to kind of enhance a program or change some stuff, add some variety or assess whatever it is. But if you can get a quality program and you can get the results you want with less, I think that's even more of an indication that like those are the big things that you need to focus on. Like if you were doing the exact same thing in 100,000 square foot weight room with like millions of dollars worth of tech and you're still doing the same thing, I don't think anybody would have a problem with having those results versus like having to like force yourself to use all these different pieces and change your program and change like your philosophy just because you have access to it. So that's good to know from for any coach that's kind of coming up. Like you can get away with nothing and still have success. Not to say that you guys have nothing, but for you to focus on the most important things and like what that is and just kind of the meat and potatoes of what you do and do that extremely well. Like that pays dividends when it comes to having success on the field and actually developing your players. Um, with what we kind of talked about, like obviously like hockey being so prevalent and like having a coach that's bought into like only wanting to recruit players that want to go professional. I don't know how some of your other teams' mentality or training comes to it or like their maybe skill level. But when it comes to like developing different types of athletes for that, like we already mentioned, we both love training and we both like getting into the weight room and like that side of it ourselves. And it's kind of innately built into us, but we can't love it as much as the athletes. And oftentimes we think that they should love it more. Do you have like maybe you don't have to be specific about what teams, or have you seen like some teams that like they kind of know their playing career is done after college, or maybe aren't as committed or don't really see professional sports after their university career? Like, do you have to kind of change your approach in any way, or do you have to kind of, does the weight room like culture change when that team comes in the room versus maybe a team that's like dead set on this is a stepping stone to the next bigger thing?
Yes and no. There are some of our teams that well, there's some of our teams that are more competitive, and some that aren't. But for example, our men's volleyball team um, has guys that go play on the national team pretty much every year. So this last Olympics in Paris, we had 3 alumni play on the men's volleyball on our Canadian national team. So when you become a Spartan men's volleyball player, the expectation is that, we're going to win nationals hopefully, but that, you will become someone who potentially could play on the national team. So for them, it's a lot easier to motivate because most of them have that inherent motivation of like, I want to be on the national team. I want to continue to pursue this at a high level. Not everybody's like that, obviously, but most of them are. Then there's other teams where actually before our current men's hockey head coach, so he's in his third year. So before that, the previous coach didn't have that same mentality of recruiting guys that only wanted to play pro. And I had a really hard time with men's hockey, and it was driving me nuts because it's like I'm a hockey guy, like this should be the easiest for me. Like I should be able to relate to them, but I had a really hard time motivating them. And one of my colleagues made a good point of the thing you have to understand for them at the time was most of those guys came there to just finish out their career. And they go to 8 a.m. class, they go to lift, they go to practice, they do all these hard things, and then they go home, sit on the couch, and watch their best friend play in the NHL that night because they made it to the NHL and they didn't. And so that kind of really put it into perspective of, okay, like maybe I need to back off some of these guys. Not in a way of like I still shouldn't try to get the most out of them, but just understanding that hey, they don't want it that bad. Like they're just here because they get the scholarship money from playing junior hockey. So that was kind of my mentality with the men's hockey team, and it worked out really well. Like just being more of like just hanging out, just chatting with them, shooting the bull in the weight room. I can speak hockey lingo, you can say, so it made it easy for me. But now, once again, with our new head coach, kind of in recruiting just higher level or more motivated guys, I've had to shift again of like, okay, wow, like now I actually can push these guys again because they all do want to go play pro, whether it's, some lower level league in Europe or it is a higher level here. We've had guys kind of go all over. And so it makes it easier to motivate. I'd say for me, from a general standpoint, I wouldn't, I don't treat the teams too differently. Obviously, I coach cross country a little bit different than I coach men's rugby because just the different personalities. But for me, like I want to win. I want our athletes to win. I want them all to get better. I want them all to, walk away with 5 national championship rings on their fingers by the time they're done. And so that takes a certain expectation. It takes a certain standard from them, but also from me. And so I can't be soft if I want them to win. And so regardless if athletes do want to go pursue athletics at the next level, for me, I always see it like I want to get the most out of you as a human being. I want to teach you commitment and time management because regardless if you go on to become, an Olympian or you go become a business owner and a husband and a wife and a parent, that takes commitment. That takes hard work, that takes effort. And so I think the weight room translates to all areas of your life, whether it's sports or just life. And so for me, I want to use the platform I have, which is the weight room, to instill these qualities into everybody. Again, whether it's we're trying to pursue a national championship, you're trying to be a pro athlete, or you're just trying to be a better dad. I don't want you to miss a training session because I want you to understand the importance of commitment so that you go to your son's soccer game or you go to your wife's doctor's appointment when she asks you and all those things. And it makes it easier for me to communicate that because I am a dad and I am a husband. So I give examples from my own life of like, hey, this is where I needed to commit. This is where I needed to do whatever. This isn't just, some airy fairy thing I'm making up. So I'd say I treat everybody the same, regardless of where they're at, because I think they all need to learn the same values.
Yeah, I think that's huge too, because like kind of showing them the bigger picture and like developing those values too. If you're only looking at them from like an athlete lens and like a competitive like sport sort of like lens, it can get real discouraging when like a team doesn't want it as much as you. And like, yeah, you do have to tailor how you coach. And I'd obviously love for all my teams to be more bought in and want to like compete for like conference and like national championships regularly. But you have to want it. Like that has to be a goal, and like your expectations and standards have to match like what the goal you're trying to do is. And then in the weight room, I can hold you to those standards. But it's hard to hold someone to such a high standard when all they want to do is kind of see out their career and just like, okay, this is the only place that I got recruited to. Like, I just want to play sports for the next couple years until I'm done, and then I'll just call it quits. Like, the hardest part is when the team, like, there's a divide within the team, or like there's a coaching change too, and you're trying to like get the new crop of like mentality, like the coaches, new recruits, all on board, and there's like a clear divide in it. But kind of understanding that and being able to tell athletes like the bigger picture of what you're building in the weight room has a direct carryover to like how you're going to execute and do all these different things within your life. Like being able to have like time. like commitment, like hard work, the effort, like being able to be on time, like personal, like teamwork, all those things are still things that you're going to have in a professional career, whether it's sports or not sports, or within your family life, within the your interactions with other people too. So you can still develop those in the weight room and it be super beneficial, even if it's not related to the sport that you chose to play.
Yeah, absolutely. And I heard it said best. One of my colleagues said that strength and conditioning makes you more of who you are. So if you're a hard worker, strength and conditioning will highlight that. If you're not a hard worker, strength and conditioning will highlight that. If you have a problem with commitment, strength and conditioning will show that. And so while I agree with that, where like the athletes that I have a hard time motivating in the weight room, the coaches have a hard time motivating as well. And those are the same athletes that, are skipping class. Like it's, who you are in one way seems to be where you are everywhere. But I also think that the weight room is a great place to grow those characteristics and those qualities, whether it's as a team, by going through hard stuff together and being able to be resilient, or as an individual, again, as you mentioned, like learning to show up on time and learning to, do what is asked of you and to help, your teammates and, help other people. So I am biased, but I think the weight room is one of the ultimate teachers in life. And I think it's something that is lifelong. Like hopefully the athletes that I coach, they don't graduate and then boom, they never set foot in a weight room again. Hopefully that, I've taught them enough that they know how to train, but they also have fostered a love of, or I fostered a love of training in them so that they at least continue to be healthy, active adults and, parents and grandparents, and they can pass those values down. But yeah, I think the weight room it just reaches far beyond anything that we can even understand. And I've even seen that like in the past 5 years, I've had athletes reach out to me, you know, that graduated 2, 3 years ago, just thanking me because now they're running their first marathon, or they're teaching a PE class and they're using the same things that I taught them when they're an athlete. Just those little things like that. It's cool to see kind of like your coaching tree kind of branch out, and whether it's a former intern that is now a strength coach somewhere else, or an athlete that's doing something. It's beneficial to give your athletes your best and to teach them and educate them, because again, it's not just about wins and losses, it's about life, and that obviously goes forever.
Yeah, that definitely a lot of those values definitely transcend the weight room, and the impact that you can make in the weight room has a lasting impression on athletes, especially if they're going to be reaching back out and having those goals that just extend like towards the person, the individual that you're dealing with, not just as an athlete, but like looking at their career and their life past the university level and like their athletic playing days. Like that's I think that's huge. And that's a portion of strength conditioning and like coaching that we don't really, it's not like written in our roles and responsibilities, or it's not written in our job duties, but I think it's a responsibility that we still have to kind of keep in the back of our minds when we're coaching and when we're programming, that a lot of the stuff we're going to say, a lot of the things that we're doing are going to have a lasting impression beyond just the time that we have in person. So that's a great point. So, hey, like any good training session, coach, well, we end the show with the finisher. So I got 4 quarters, 4 questions, and maybe overtime at the back end. But you can take any of these questions and expand on them, or you can go rapid fire and shoot from the hip. But you ready?
I'm ready to go.
All right, first one I got for you. Biggest influence in the strength conditioning profession.
Aside from Andrew Hemming, who I mentioned was my first strength coach, probably Michael Boyle. So I've read his books. Kind of I listened to his podcast early on. He's been one of my biggest influences over the last number of years.
All right. Hey, so second one, when you're not coaching, you're not training yourself, what are some of your favorite hobbies outside of the weight room walls?
Uh, Thinking about coaching, spending time with my kids. I love being active and going outside, whether that's going for walks, going for bike rides, just trying to stay active, get outside, and spend time with my kids, getting to combine all of those in one is would be my cup of tea.
All right. And so if you weren't in strength and conditioning, what do you think you would be doing as a profession? And if I took hockey off the table, what sport would you rather go? What would you like to go pro in if hockey wasn't an option?
Well, the sport one for me would be basketball, which I've actually never played basketball. That's one of the sports I've never played, but I just love it, and I could go into a whole bunch of reasons, but I would want to play in the NBA if I could. But from a profession, if I couldn't be a strength coach, um, there's a whole bunch of things I've thought about I could do. I think being a motivational speaker would be really sweet. Just getting to almost coach people through life and those kind of things. Being a sports analyst, I think would be awesome. Like you just get to sit there and talk about sports all day, which is pretty much what I do as a strength coach anyway. So I think that would be, and actually have people value your opinion. So that'd be cool. Um, but probably one of those two. I have this weird dream of like just cutting grass. Like we don't, so I live in an apartment, so we don't have a yard, but I don't know what it is, just about sitting on a lawnmower or even pushing a lawnmower and just having a patch of grass to cut. So I always tell my wife that whenever I retire as a strength coach, I'm just gonna hire myself out to the local high school and like just cut their football field grass and just, I don't know what it is about that, but I just feel like it's super peaceful.
Well, not surprisingly, some I think at least one or two of people have already said that before too. And I think it was because it's one of those things where you can kind of see a job well done. Like you could see a finishing product right when you're there. Like you know how like mangy and like overweeded everything looks like and overgrown. But then when you're done like with the lawn, like and it looks pristine, like it's a big accomplishment and it's not a bad way to kind of spend the day outside for sure. But so when it comes to like an ideal training day for yourself, I know it's probably a little bit different, wrangling the kids or doing body weight stuff versus weightlifting and everything. But if you could set up a training session for yourself, what is music that's on the stereo playing, and what is your favorite post-training meal?
Oh, so well, I actually listen to podcasts while I train. That way I get a little pro D in. But if I'm listening to music, it's either Nickelback or AC/DC. I'm in the training session. I'm doing some form of squat. I That's one of the things I carried over from Olympic weightlifting was I love squatting, whether it's single leg squats, front squats, back squats, like anything. I just every session it's like I got to squat, otherwise it wasn't a good session. And then do some form of conditioning as well because I'm not getting that old, but as I get older, I realize I need to stay fit, keep up with my kids. And then a post-training meal is always the same for me. It's always um, oatmeal with a scoop of chocolate protein powder, some cinnamon and salt, and down the hatch. Got the carbs and protein in there. Keeps me full for, the next few hours of coaching, and then we're off to the races.
Nice. Hey, so last one I got for you for overtime. Like in your opinion, like what is like the most important attribute of a successful coach and like the most important attribute of a successful athlete if they're different?
Oh, are they different? Probably not, but I'm going to make them different. I'd say for a coach, it would be like a desire to help people. So there's a whole bunch of different, like you can understand the science, you can, understand training methodologies and whatnot, but if you don't actually want to help people, you're not going to put the work in to get better because regardless if you're training, you know, older clients to, live longer and live healthier, or you're training youth athletes to play pro, or, at my setting, trying to get kids better so that they win national championships. At the end of the day, it all comes down to helping people. So whether you want to call it empathy or compassion or love or whatever it is, but to me, as a coach, would be just having a desire to help people and want them to get better. And as an athlete, um, similar lines, but more just personal, like just passion for what you do. You can call it hard work, you can be talented, you can all these things, but if you don't actually love doing what you do, if you don't love getting shots up, if you don't love, skating or, running 10 miles a week as a cross country athlete, all these things, like you need to love what you do. So it almost goes the same for both. In strength and conditioning, you need to love what you do, but specifically you need to love helping people. And then as an athlete, you just need to have passion for whatever your craft is.
Yeah, I think those two kind of go in line, even if you separated them in that way, like you put them from the lens of like the type of person they are, but just having passion and dedication for what you're doing, that's huge because that's ultimately the reason why you got into either the profession or it's the reason why you got into playing that specific sport. You found a love for it and you want to kind of maintain and have that thing flourish so you can do it as long as possible. And I think that's the easiest way for people to either change careers or be done with their sport. Like when they don't find that love for it anymore, they don't love training, they don't love playing, or they don't love like trying to help and see others have success and get them to a point where they couldn't do it themselves. So that's a great point. Well, hey, Coach, like I said, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today. And then I know spending a little bit of your winter break ish, like between the holidays to come on. For anybody that's got any follow-up questions for you, want to see, like, I know you will link all your articles and everything also that you've written yourself. But where can they follow you on social media or reach out if they want to pick your brain on something?
Absolutely. So the easiest way for me would be via email. I use email like text messaging. I'll answer you pretty much right away. So my email is cole.hergott, so cole.hergott at twu.ca. Feel free to fire any questions off. If you want to see on social media, I'm on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now at Hergott94. I primarily use Twitter for consuming information, not providing it, but our Trinity Western, our TWU Strength and Conditioning account on Instagram is at TWU Strength. And that's where we'll post, like I'll post a bunch of content, helpful tips. We'll, post things we're doing here. So that would probably be the best way to learn what we're doing. But if you want to reach out to me, email is definitely the best.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure we link all that stuff so that anybody that wants to follow along and reach out to you has all those links and everything. But I appreciate you taking the time today to share with everybody. And it's been a great time. So I appreciate it, Cole.
My pleasure. I appreciate the time as well. And yeah, it was fun.
That's it for this episode of The Strength Game. Thank you again to this week's guest and to our sponsors. Be sure to connect and keep up with our guests at the links in the description below. Remember to subscribe to us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider to stay up to date on all future episodes. Also, check us out on YouTube and CoachO'Brien.com, where you can find all the video versions of these episodes, as well as show notes, episode schedule, and much more. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome and appreciated. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week for another great episode of The Strength Game.